each time I think you just, you think you're at that breaking point, and then it was always a surprise. You think, this is it, this is the moment I'm going to break. I can't take any more, and you don't break, and then you get up the next day, and then you're quite surprised at yourself, and this little nugget of strength just goes, oh, I'm stronger than I thought I was, and that builds and builds and builds. And
hello and welcome. My name is Liz Gleeson, and you're listening to Shapes of Grief. Shapes of Grief is a curation of stories from ordinary people on their experience of loss, how their grief impacted them, and what helped them to find their feet again. Loss can really have such a profound effect on our lives, and it is my hope that Shapes of Grief will provide comfort, hope, and inspiration to our listeners, so that together we can get more comfortable talking about grief. If you like what you hear, please consider becoming a patron of Shapes of Grief on patreon.com. This is a listener-supported podcast, so please do donate, like, share and review. It really does keep us going. For more grief resources and grief support, find and follow us on all the usual social media channels and on shapesofgrief.com. But Ruth, thank you so much for agreeing to come today. Shapes of Grief is a podcast that captures conversations with people who've experienced loss and grief in various forms in their life. And you have written extensively about your experience of loss and grief. And you've spoken extensively about it also. But for the benefit of people who mightn't have heard your story, would you fill them in? Give us a little bit of the background.
Sure. Well, yeah, where to start is the thing. My story, I suppose, is kind of out there. It's funny to be a Googled name. It's a strange thing. I can say now that I'm a writer because I wrote about my own life and my own experiences. My husband, Simon Fitzmaurice, had motor neuron disease, and he got it at a very young age. He was 34. And we were newly married with a couple of young kids, very happily married, I might add. And this was kind of like a bomb that went off in our lives. And so Simon was a pretty formidable dude, I think you could say. He was a film director, and he was on the cusp of quite a successful career when it happened. He'd made a couple of successful short films, and suddenly he was complaining of a floppy foot and got this horrendous diagnosis for a young man, and a very strange one, a very, one of those potluck, nobody's really even heard of this disease. It's Stephen Hawking was the name that sprung to mind. It was a very far away random thing, and he dealt with it in a particular way, as in a way a lot of people admire a lot. He was a courageous person and quite fiery and full of creative spirit. And he continued to work as a director. He wrote about his experiences, and we just continued with our family and continued with life.
What was your relationship with Simon like before he was ill? You said he was a formidable character. What does that mean?
I mean, it's lovely now in retrospect. I mean, obviously I've lived with the sicker version of my husband for many years, and anyone who has lived as a carer or with somebody who is not in their full health will know that it's a painful type of grief to live with somebody and watch the parts of them that you recognise slip away, and you kind of scramble around to try and keep the parts, or find the parts remaining that you recognise, and so it'd be very easy to look back with rose tinted kind of glasses and go and describe the man that he was, but the man that he was genuinely pretty awesome. He was a handsome guy, just very creative, very anyone will tell you who met him, he had that way of charming people, but like a real charm that he inspired people. He was the kind of person who would get the best out of others, and he was great fun.
Did he get the best out of you?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, isn't that what love is? You see, I think that's a lot of what love is. I mean, not that we're entirely selfish creatures, but it's like you see in somebody the best version of yourself that you could be. They inspire you to be a better person, and also together, collectively, when you engage with each other, the world seems like a better place. Simon was one of those people who, being in his company, you couldn't help but see the magic in the everyday, so I learned to live that way with him, and genuinely I could have happily lived in that bubble forever. I was working in radio, and when I met Simon, I was working doing research and production in radio in Today FM, and we very quickly decided to get married and have children, and the moment I had my first child, I quite contentedly gave up my job and started raising a young family, and at the same time would have been involved in Simon's creative dreams, and we were very much a team, so we would get ideas together, and I would sort of, we would discuss them and work on them, and I was quite happy to do that, and not as I was raising the kids, and he was working, and it was a beautiful model. And in retrospect, I wonder if life had continued that way. It's just funny the way life happens. When I think now, who would I have been if Simon had never gotten sick?
I find myself asking that question as well.
Yeah.
Where was your creativity and
there's many ways to be creative in this life, and it's important to people in different ways. And for me, the kind of creature that I am, I would always have to be doing something creative, but for me it's an interesting way to look back on it, to think, yes, I was happy back then, but I was quite naive. I was in a happy bubble, in a sort of a great love, but I'm already in my happy ending, and I can kind of sit back now, and this is life, and isn't life great? And as we all know, life doesn't really work like that. There are many troughs and dips and highs and lows, and I wonder if, it's all hypothetical, but if Simon hadn't gotten sick, I probably would have been quite happy to just keep having more kids and contentedly being behind the scenes and letting Simon do most of the creative work and putting himself out there and living that kind of a life. But that's not the hand that I got dealt.
I'm curious, Ruth, about, I'm thinking of that picture I stumbled across recently from the Wicklow Times or something, and it's us at the Greystones breastfeeding support group or something. We both had our first child, so 13, 14 years ago, and we were, it's tough. You've a new baby, you're getting used to that, but you've got your tribe around you of other women, everyone going through the same stuff. When your family gets a diagnosis of motor neuron disease, nobody else around you, I assume, had lived through that. So suddenly you're propelled into this universe. How did you manage with that big chasm between your lived experience and what everybody else was living around you?
Yeah, I mean, in a way, I think the fact that we were sort of creative types stood to us. I always say that Simon was lucky in a way, that all of his passions were so cerebral, and making films and writing were things that he could continue. But also that sense of when you grow up with those sort of creative leanings, you often feel like a bit of an alien in your own family or in your own community. You feel a little bit different from others, and it's often a kind of a journey or a process that you go through in your creative life to find like-minded people, or to gain the confidence to do what you need to do. And so having felt like that my whole life, to be told, yes, you're now completely different from everybody else, and your husband has this weird disease, it sort of felt, well, we've always been a bit, I thought that maybe we were a bit different from others, but we definitely are now.
So the universe is just confirming what you've always felt.
Confirmed my alien status.
And do you think, I'm curious about this. I've just finished reading Lynn Ruan's book, People Like Me, and, she would express similar, feeling different, feeling like she didn't belong, looking for her place to belong as well. Do you think it is just creatives, or do you think all of us at some level feel, where do I belong? Where's my tribe? Where are the people who think like me and feel like me?
Yeah, I think we can all. Different people have different. You don't have to be. I mean, creative basically encompasses such a huge thing. I don't just mean people who write poems and. I think there's definitely a part of all our psyches that is looking for, that sense of completeness or fulfillment. And genuinely, I think a lot of people walk through life in a bit of a sleepwalking state. And this is the thing this is the revelation about pain and grief and all of these things as the painful parts are a huge awakening and a metamorphosis and a part of you reaching a sense of a higher sense of yourself, of consciousness. I'm not saying that it's a constant learning thing, we're all constantly getting there, but it's a reminder of, for me it was a reminder of what the hell are we doing here. I think we can all get a little bit over civilized and over socialized and forget that there's more to life than the model of go to school, get a job, get a mortgage, get married, or one comes before the other, or whatever.
Watch Coronation Street every evening.
Yeah, you can, and it is, and whether it's a diagnosis, I mean, that's a bit of a kick in the face. There are gentler ways to be reminded of that in life. So it was certainly a huge one for us, but most of us, nobody escapes that wake up, and actually Simon used to describe it because for him in his writing. Being diagnosed was that huge wake up call, and he said he often looked at his life, he could look back and pinpoint times when he was sort of just moseying along and in that kind of sleepwalking state where he wasn't really thinking about things, and those wake up moments where you're just pulled back and you see things from a different perspective and almost that existential, like, oh my god, I'm here, I'm going to die one day, and what's going on. And those moments can be hugely creatively, they can be amazing and in terms of what you can achieve if they're channeled the right way. So
and in psychology circles they'd call it post-traumatic growth. And you've described that beautifully. It's like when a bomb goes off in your life, suddenly everything, if you have been living in a fog, the trauma or the grief or the loss is so visceral that you have no choice but to acknowledge this pain and hold this pain and put it somewhere or do something with it or simply carry it,
Yeah, and it's interesting that too, because a lot of people, like, obviously I wrote about it, and I didn't do it in a way of, when I began to write about what was happening to us, it was really diary entries for myself. I was talking to myself without the intention of it becoming a book, but then obviously it did become a book and it got put out there. And even the fact that the story was out there in the media or whatever about Simon, because it was such an unusual situation, you would have a lot of people, I always found people's reaction to it interesting. People kind of will often look at you and say, wow, you're so brave, you're so courageous, and I was never comfortable with that because I didn't feel that I was doing anything unusual.
You had no choice. You were surviving.
Yeah, it was survival, and I didn't think, when I looked at myself compared to other people, I could see bravery in others, and it kind of confused me to think, well, what is bravery? Actually, I read something the other day which said that courage really is just acting from the heart. And I thought that was lovely, that if you look at it that way, that people are committing acts from the heart, heartfelt actions all the time, and they can be tiny things, they can be normal everyday things. It's all courage.
It comes from the word cœur, which is French for heart.
So acts of the heart, which is lovely, because which is very encouraging for humanity to think that we're all essentially brave once you're doing something from love, or for doing it for those reasons, it's by its very nature a brave act, which is kind of nice.
And a lot of people don't come from the heart; they're coming from the head and from societal norms. So it's lovely that you're talking about this fog that is, that a trauma or a death can release, and bring forth. It's like it shatters an ego or shatters a persona and brings forth something with huge potential. It's like, will I go further into the fog by drinking, by smoking, by, losing myself in addiction or denial? Or do I choose to step out of the fog now that this event has happened in my life?
Absolutely. And I mean, in saying that, I am no stranger to those distractions myself. I mean, I've gone through the years with Simon. He was sick for a very long time. Luckily I had my writing, because I could explore these things. So if I found myself, downing a bottle of wine at the weekend, or those kind of things, I was able to talk to myself about it and go, what's going on here? And just channel the feelings behind all that stuff. It's the best form of therapy, but that's just my way. I mean, there are many ways of doing it.
What did your grief look like at its worst?
It is ongoing. Even every time I think that I'm over it, or not over it, or I'm at a certain stage of it, I get pulled back by my children, by a box I find in the wardrobe, all of that. But if the hardest part perhaps to remember, I think, was probably when Simon was diagnosed a certain amount of time, and I sort of think of it as when he was diagnosed first, we went into hero mode. So we were just going to be these superheroes who fought this beast and won and fought at life, and so I was this kind of walking, talking hero, holding a child in one hand and pushing my husband in the wheelchair with the other, and that was a way of coping. And we were living in the countryside in County Louth in a little cottage which was about 20 minutes from anywhere, and it was our dream place. We had sold up, left our house in Greystones to go and kind of live this artist life of living mortgage free, and Simon was going to write films and make films, and I was going to hopefully write, I think I wanted to write children's books or something at that point, and raise the kids in a big garden. And I was trying to do it all, and I was kind of in denial about the fact, or very defensive about the fact, that I might not be coping. And I can remember just the kids were really young, and so I was running from changing nappies to running down to Simon and helping him. He sort of had a studio attached to the house, and I remember just running. There was stairs that I used to run up and down the whole time outside the house, and running to screaming child, running to him. And I fell one day and landed on my face and fell really badly, and scraped the whole side of my face. And I was just lying there thinking, I actually don't think I can get up. I might have broken my arm or something, and there was nobody there to help me get up. I kind of started crying and laughing at the same time. That was the kind of wake up call that maybe I was, in a bad place. But at that time, I remember I used to do things like just push the nails of my my fingernails into the palm of my hand as hard as I could. It was almost just like to release the pressure, to feel something. Or I'd bang my head off a wall till I saw sparks, just out of some kind of just to feel something. It was just this frustration of
trying to physicalize the mental anguish.
Yeah, that kind of thing. And that was quite a hard time. But there's been plenty of them. Each time I think you just you think you're at that breaking point, and then it was always a surprise. You think, this is it, this is the moment I'm going to break. I can't take any more, and you don't break, and then you get up the next day, and then you're quite surprised at yourself, and this little nugget of strength just goes, oh, I'm stronger than I thought I was, and that builds and builds and builds. And
that famous saying, you're stronger than you think you are.
Yeah.
You mentioned about people saying to you, you're so strong, or you're so brave, and how it didn't resonate for you. What other things did people say that were not helpful?
Oh God, you want to get into that? Well, There's help. I always find it amazing that help is a funny thing, and I'm quite an independent person, and it's a real thing that the help that you get offered is never really the help that you need, and learning to articulate the help that you want or need is a very difficult thing. I don't think I've even still mastered it. And that was my huge frustration, really, is like being given help that turned out to be more stressful, and almost being slave to other people's help.
And I can just hear the listeners going, "Oh my God, what? Because have I been doing the wrong thing?"
Yeah, but it's not, and people are wonderful.
It's so helpful to tell people what not to say as well as what to say, which we'll come to.
Yeah.
But what sort of things can you remember that just didn't work, and why?
Well, I'm talking more about, Simon, for starters, just from, when we were living in the countryside, and we used to get visits from public health nurses and things like that, and that kind of help, I mean, sort of the help that's supposed to be given. And because Simon was sort of, he wasn't quite one thing or another, that nobody really knew what to do with a motor neuron disease patient, and so we did get wonderful help, but people used to come to the house, and so say the social worker would turn up, and I'd sit there and think, I wasn't really sure why she was there. I wasn't sure what her role was or what my role was in response, or was she judging me as a mother? Should I offer her a cup of tea? And all these things are going on in your head, and you're in this process, but you're not really understanding it. And then they'd say things like, do you think you'd like to talk to somebody? And I'd say, well, yeah. And then nothing would ever come of it. Like, no kind of psychological help was offered, really. Yeah. It was sort of mentioned and then forgotten about, and that's really what I needed, was to talk it out. And it was more kind of an interest in ticking boxes, and I'm just ticking boxes was actually something that was said to me a few times. You think, great, wow. Yeah. Well, tick away, but it's not really much help to me. In terms of friends, we were I'm very lucky in that regard. I have very good friends, and there is a thing that when somebody gets sick, certain friendships fall away, and certain other friendships that were other people who weren't close friends suddenly become indispensable, like they just they're your lifeblood, and so that's interesting. I think you become much more selective in your friendships, which again I think is probably a good way to be in life. Yeah. Often, because you don't have the energy. We waste a lot of energy having social exchanges that drain us as people, not realizing how much it is draining us. And when you're in that survival mode, you can't cope with that at all. So you're not capable of having those exchanges in the first place, which is actually quite liberating.
You need the person who'll just come in and say, I've made dinner for 3 days and I'm going to clean up here.
Well, yeah, more just, I think I became a lot more of an intense person as well. There was little time for chit chat, or that draining sort of chit chat that, or those type of friends who might make you feel a little bit inadequate and you're not really sure why. Are they putting you down? Or all those sort of like toxic exchanges that we all sort of hover around in everyday life. They were all just cut off. I couldn't do that, and so I could only be around people who almost it was like I was only capable of speaking to other people's souls. I couldn't even do chit chat. It was just, I was probably a really scary, intense person, probably still am. But
so it's interesting you said some people dropped away and others you didn't expect ended up coming in. And well,
some people, and I saw that with Simon too. Some of his close older friends, a lot of people just because of their own issues don't know what to do around illness, and it's not for any kind of meanness or lack of depth on their part. It's just they don't know what to do and they don't know how, and some people are just more equipped to cope with that. And so our friendships kind of got a bit more streamlined, and also we were difficult people to be around. There's no and some people don't have the language for that, or they can't navigate it, and we all have our own busy lives, and there just isn't space in other people's lives to accommodate this complicated situation, and and so I think it falls into a natural pattern where it's supposed to go, that you're not supposed to be surrounded by amazing people who can help you. Just the right few is enough.
Yeah.
You don't want a whole gang of people coming in. I certainly didn't.
What were the qualities, Ruth, of those people that helped you?
A sense of realness about them. Often you would find, I do think there's that thing, it's almost people who have been through any kind of trauma in their life up thus far. I mean, everybody goes through something, but some people just haven't got there yet, and you can almost pick them out in a crowd once you're in that zone. It's like a secret society of the hurt, I call it, or something, you know. And so you pick these people out and you naturally gravitate towards these people.
What do you see?
I don't know. I like, you're talking magic here. Like it's just something, you know, a flicker of the eyelid. No, I don't know. I think it's just it's an energy that you're drawn to them, whatever that is, that magical thing that happens between people. It's a soulful thing. It's a wonderful thing, and it's I think that you don't, when you're that raw, you don't even have to be open to it. It just comes to you, which is another blessing. I didn't do anything amazing to attract these people into my world. We just sort of gravitated towards each other, and at different times. I think the only thing you have to be aware of is to allow yourself, be open to it. Don't be afraid. But again, as I say, I think when you're down on the floor, when you're that wrecked, you're just looking for, you are more open to what comes in because you're desperate.
Yeah.
So.
And Ruth, you mentioned, you know, that a lot of people, or most people, at some stage in their life, they have some massive loss or trauma or transition that does propel them into a different path, or onto a different path, or into a different universe. This happened you, but it was an ongoing process for a lot of people. It's a death or an illness that's maybe a year or 2 years, and then someone dies, and it's a transitionary point in their life. You had such a long process. How did you manage that?
Because I'm brave and amazing, obviously. No, I think I don't know. I don't know how I managed. I think the writing, as I say, was huge. The friendships I made, and it all. I can't really separate the two. When it started, it also helped me look inward and kind of start talking to myself in a way I hadn't before. And I started sea swimming, which is no coincidence either. It was all this sort of draw towards very kind of meaningful, real things, and the sea swimming particularly, I think, is a way of just being just waking yourself up every day and clearing your brain out and being connected to nature. I was just drawn to all the right things. That's how I did it, I suppose. And as I say, I don't really look at it as this horrible kind of cut in my life or ordeal that I had to go through, because at the same time it was happening, as this awful thing was happening, my writing voice was being created at the same time, so my creative self was being created at the same time, so I can't separate the two. So but despite all of the bad things that happened, I'm not saying I'm glad Simon got sick, but I'm grateful for being able to live this life now where I get to channel all this stuff and write, which is what I love to do, and it gives me a great sense of fulfillment and meaning.
Did you ever feel like it does? It does. I'm just envisaging the yin and yang symbol, you know. Just the juxtaposition of these two lives that you're living. Yeah. You know, and how one is sustaining the other.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. Did you ever feel like leaving?
It never. I began to when Simon got really. It was very difficult to watch him suffer, particularly towards the end. And I was happy as long as I felt that his life was, that he had some sense of love and meaning in his life, and that his suffering was, was juxtaposed with enough of the good stuff, if you know what I mean.
Yeah.
And then towards the end it got very, very difficult, and it's very difficult to watch the person that you love suffer like that, and and then you have all that guilt of thinking this is too much, and he would have been the gauge of what was too much or not. So often there were times when I thought it was too much, and then I'd see the kids crawl on top of him and lay their hands on him, and see his eyes light up, and I think, oh, I was wrong, he's okay, he's getting something here. But yeah, the end was slow and painful and difficult, and more, not that I wanted out, but I began to kind of pray that his suffering would end for sure. And that's a difficult thing to admit, because it's a hard thing, to sometimes when you love somebody, it's natural, you don't want to see them suffer. So not that I never contemplated leave what? My family. I began to, the reason I started swimming at the Cove was because my home had become a place I did want to leave. It wasn't my home, it was full of nurses and it was a public space. I just began to spread my home out into another place, so the whole tribe thing was that the Cove became a second home, or a place where I felt at peace. Just finding, it's like, I mean, you have kids, and that sense of a chaotic house, you can often be crawling through it, just trying to find a little quiet corner, a little place of peace, and you can't find it. But particularly, that's fine if it's your own kids, it's sort of just an eye roll and take a breather outside. But when your house is full of nurses and machinery, it's a difficult, it's a horrible thing.
What did the sea give you, Ruth?
Yeah, well, as well, I think it gave me a lot of things. It gave that sort of, no matter how bad the day was, that reassurance that there was something I could do to make myself feel better, which is a real comfort, better than drink or drugs or any of those things. It was just that sense of, knowing, no matter how bad things are, I know if I jump in the sea I'll feel better. But like, on a more romantic level, when I look back, I can kind of think that, like, my husband couldn't physically hold me. I had, like, holding on to children, and that is a certain, but I was lacking in a whole, all of those tactile ways of bonding as a couple were being taken, and I was lonely, and so there is that sense of the sea holding you, I know that sounds a bit cheesy, but like it was that sense of
like
being
this big container that you can sink into. And
it's this living, moving thing, and I used to feel held by the sea, and that sense of, even the kind of the randomness of the waves and all of that stuff. It was, I think it's all connected to that sense of, like I'm talking about, that the sense of us becoming over civilized, and as women as well, we have these these cycles every month, and but that it's all connected to the waves and the moon and all of that stuff, and connecting with the sea, I was connecting to that kind of sort of a wilder kind of thing in my psyche that maybe was lacking, and that it's sort of a thing that all women go through, or people.
It sounds like just a total expansion of your awareness and your consciousness.
Yeah.
And we have to do that to survive grief. We have to grow. We can't sit around waiting for the grief to shrink. We have to grow to be able to carry it better.
And also then you're not just, whatever grief I had, I mean, I thought I had it all figured out, and that as I say, the sort of, there was a certain amount of, it was so painful, but there was a relief when Simon finally let go, and when he died, because the pain was over, and his pain, and to see someone so incapacitated and not being able, once he couldn't communicate at all, it was horrifying to think he was trapped in a body that couldn't move. And after that initial relief subsided, I also thought that I grieved a lot of the old him before he died. And then the first year after he died was spent dealing with the kids' grief. And so I have 5 little souls who are all very different at home, and they all have their own grief, which is different to mine, and childlike, based on like age appropriate grief based on where they're at.
Because Simon was, such a presence in the house.
Yeah.
Even though at the end all he could move were his eyes, right?
Oh God, I mean, he was, with kids, you know, he was more than he was fully their dad. I mean, some of the younger ones, they don't remember him as the old Simon who moved and talked or whatever.
Yeah.
But yet he was a wonderful dad, and very involved in their lives, and fought to be so, and they, it was amazing to watch their sense of, they were just quite happy to know that he was there. And then he wasn't there.
It's like someone's presence alone, without words, without movement. There's such a presence about someone.
Yeah.
Even if it's just communication through their eyes.
Exactly.
You know, so much can be said.
Yeah, for sure. And and they have really struggled, and they will struggle their whole lives, because your dad is your dad, and you know, when it's something that is going to be a job for me to help them through for their whole life, because every major event, every milestone in their life, they're always going to be thinking, my dad's not here.
Yeah.
And there's nothing I can do about that, you know. We just have to.
Yeah.
We just have
How
to
do you
navigate
manage that? Because as mothers, we want to fix things for our children.
Yeah.
We want to make it okay.
Well, I struggle with that. I struggle with that hugely, that I can't fix it, you know, and I try and fix it, and I try and do all that I can. But at a certain point with them, we went through a year, and some of them, they all dealt with it in different ways, and you know, some plateau at a certain point, and others are coping by coping, and then some of them aren't, and one of my kids particularly just got stuck, you know, and he'd say himself, he's like, I'm stuck in the grief, he would say, and he was, and it's very difficult to see your 9-year-old lethargic with grief, and pale, and non-functioning, and not able to cope, and not able to concentrate in school, and doesn't know what's wrong, you know, can't articulate what's wrong, just is like a depressed person. And so I had to concede that I didn't know how to cope with this, and they began to do, which obviously suggested by you gave me great advice, and 3 of them went into play therapy, which has helped enormously, just to give some of it over to a professional person who can, or give them a space outside of the home where they can express themselves, and you know, and it's hard as a mother to kind of give your child over to someone else and say, I can't fix this, I need help.
And it's essential. Yeah. It's essential for us to know that although we gave birth to them and have brought them into the world, there is a world raising them. Yeah. Whether we like it or not. Yeah. You know, every teacher, every therapist, every friend, every family they know, we're all doing a little bit of teaching and raising and holding each other. I
felt relief when I saw the good effect that it had on them. And then in saying that, you know, you get one over the line, and then one of the other goes. That's the way it is in big families.
Because you have 5 children.
With 5, and they all have different issues at different stages, and yes, it can be exhausting. It certainly keeps me busy, but then sometimes sometimes I get it wrong, and you know, your patience runs out. But I always find, even at those times when the patience runs out, it can often end with 2 of you crying and hugging each other, and then it comes out mutually, and so it's never the wrong thing.
Yeah, and sometimes that's what's most needed, is just to have a good old howl, and acknowledge the pain, and then make dinner. Yeah,
exactly. But I found that that was a whole other level of the grief, was remembering or going back to the old Simon and remembering him, the guy who, you know, used to have a cheeky glint in his eye and pinch my waist, and you know, all those things, reconciling myself with that, and it's important for the kids, because they need to hear about their dad in the old days, so, you know, and all of that. And
so how do you do that? We would call that continuous bonds.
Yeah.
So, a life has ended, but a relationship hasn't. How do you keep those bonds alive and continue to have Simon in the family in a different shape or form? Or do you? Have you thought about that?
Well, I did a really healthy thing, which was, write the screenplay of my book for the last year, which was a strange and I think it became part of that process. I was in the middle of it thinking, this is either really good therapy or I'm going to need therapy after doing this, because I was writing, scenarios from the past. I mean, I was literally surrounded by ghosts and, writing scenes of dialogue and making people speak and really visually making the past come alive in my own head and on the page. It was a strange process, and I did it, and then I left it for a while and came back to it, and then even found that over the few months where I hadn't looked at it, was able to look back and gain insight into the threads that I had written and go, oh, I didn't even see that and just make sense of things in a different way, which was really good, and I felt a bit wiser for it at the end, and it really did. I felt like I made my peace with him a little bit and made my peace with the old him versus the sick him.
Yeah.
And he's in the bookshelf as well. That was part of it. I sound like a mad woman saying my husband's in the bookshelf, but we have this floor to ceiling bookshelf in our kitchen, which is a lot of his collection of books. And as I was writing the screenplay, for whatever reason, call it poltergeist or ghostly things, but books began to pop out, or I would find that a book was it would catch my eye on the bookshelf for whatever reason, because it was slightly out from the rest or whatever, or it was at a weird angle, and Simon was he used to write little notes and stick them into his books, and he would scribble kind of things on these little notes to himself, and or put things in the books, and I went on this strange little journey of finding things in all his books, which was sort of part of the process too. It was kind of nice. It's weird to say my husband's in the bookshelf, so I kind of feel like he's there sometimes.
Do you talk about him at home?
Oh yeah. I think that's important. It's how you, and the kids have, they all have their little pictures of him up and all of that kind of thing, and memories of him in that way.
And I'm curious, Ruth, after such a long illness and the anticipatory grief you must have gone through, living with this loss, did anything about the actual grief of Simon dying surprise you? Because we talked earlier about how, although very ill, Simon had such a presence.
Yeah.
And even when somebody is dying, it's very different when they're actually dead. It's quite stark. Is there anything about that process, which you must have gone over 100 times in your head during his illness?
Everything surprised me. The entire, the way I thought it would be and how it was were completely different.
We'll start with how you thought it would be.
Well, I don't know. I thought that I had gained a certain amount of... I didn't think I'd be as lonely as I was. I thought that I had... I was quite surprised that I missed the nurses when they left as well. Like, really missed them. Because, I took for granted... it's like anything. You get used to a certain way of existing. And you fight against it and go, I just want a bit of peace, and suddenly they were all gone. And particularly in the evenings then, I'd spend all day with the kids and there was nobody there in the evening. It was just me on my own and this terrible silence, and I thought that I like my own company. I'm quite independent in that way. I mean, I love company, but I don't mind a bit of solitude. But this was it's like a chasm, it was quite shocking, and the bustle of the house was gone once the kids were in bed or the kids were at school. I was blissfully alone for some parts when I was working and writing, but the night time, the evenings really got me, and so what I started doing actually was just getting up really early and going to bed with the kids, so I didn't have to cope with that. Wow. I just changed the way that I lived to balance, and over time I've gotten used to a new way of existing. It doesn't bother me as much. I don't have that loneliness now, but particularly at the beginning it was quite a shock to realise that I missed them all. Not that I bonded and had some wonderful friendships from the nurses in the house, but yeah, that was a huge surprise to miss that. And
I think we can underestimate how other people regulate us. You know, when we're used to having people around, whether we like it or not, it does become, it's like ants in a colony. You know, we need each other, we're regulating each other, that we do something to each other way beyond an emotional level, like on a biological level as well. We're regulating each other, and even if it's someone like an ex-husband or, a nurse that maybe you wanted the space from, it can be so dysregulating when they're gone. And that can surprise many people.
I was surprised by that, because I thought, and then just the regular noises in my world changed so much. All the noises of the machinery, I used to hear them even when they weren't there, and there was a huge adjustment. And then you go into, I think it's a very normal thing, you go into hyperdrive of there was a certain amount of reorganisation that had to be done, and that kind of I really didn't know what to do, and I decided I would just be guided by, everybody said don't do anything in a hurry, just take your time, but that revelation that you can change a space just by painting it and moving furniture, so it was just quite amazing, because we had the room that Simon used to be Simon's room is now a kid's room with three children in it, bunk beds, and the nurse's the nurse's station, or the study where the nurses hung out, which was always a busy bustly place with desks and like coffee machines and things. That's my bedroom now, and I've created this lovely haven of a place. That was my one thing that I started trying to do things that were good for the kids and change things in positive ways, and so I sort of built myself a little cave.
So you're saying you were in the nurse's station, and there's 3 kids now in Simon's room, so when Simon was alive, he was in one bedroom, the nurses had another room.
Then the kids had their bedrooms, and then I had no bed, because I was in the room with Simon up to a point, and then particularly the sicker he got, and the more interruptions he needed at night he slept with a baby monitor and nurses coming in and out, and I reached a frenzied point of no sleep and moved out of the bedroom, which was kind of a heartbreaking thing, because it was something very like primally broken, for me, moving out like that. It was part of the grieving process is admitting that part of your relationship is gone. And so I just kind of I wandered around like a nomad, for sleeping on couches, and I ended up at one stage, actually when he died, I was sleeping in the bottom bunk in the kids' room, so I was bunking in. We had this tiny little room with 2 bunk beds in an L shape, and there were 4 of us sleeping like it was like a hostel or something. So that one of the first things I did was I made myself a new room, and I got a new big comfy double bed and painted the walls orange and put this huge picture of the sea. It's actually the cove where I swim, a big painting, and so the room is literally a bed and this giant painting, and there's nothing else in it. And I still, at night, I just, when the kids when the work is done and the day's toil is over, I crawl in there and just lie down on my really comfy mattress, and I'm just happy to be there.
I love that image of the cove brought to your room. So you have this little sanctuary, and the cove that has held you for all these years is now there holding you at home as well.
Yeah, for sure.
I'm really struck by you floating around the house from sofa to bunk bed to wherever you can grab a bit of duvet, Ruth.
Yeah.
What have you learned about self-care in all of this?
Well, I'm still learning, The self-care is huge for women, isn't it? And
this is is vital for people who are grieving, so you really do share what you've learned.
Yeah, well, I've learned that it's, like I say, I built myself a room. Realizing that you have to do the things that are good for you. It's not selfishness, I think it's easier when you have a lot of kids at a certain age, and most women come to that realization that, you know, you're the, and as a single parent as well, you're the engine. So if you break down, the whole ship ain't gonna run, you know. So if you don't look after yourself, they won't, you know, they will, they need you to be well and healthy and okay. And so I started trying to look at things that I got a kick out of but weren't damaging, you know. So rather than drown in wine, which can be nice, but or eat bad food and things like that, I try to get my kicks doing things that are healthy. Sometimes that works and sometimes it doesn't, but you know, the swimming every day is a huge thing, and that's something that I'm going to always need, and you see, for me, writing is self-care. Like when things get too much and I get overwhelmed, as can often be the case when you're minding 5 kids by yourself, it's all manageable when I'm doing the right things, you know. And if my head starts getting swamped with worries and what ifs and we're doomed, I just say to myself, it's just because you're not writing, you know. And it just becomes an answer for everything. It's just because you're not writing, so just do what you have to, you know, you have to do to feel better, and keep going.
So it sounds like your external world is as good as your internal world. It's all projected out, right?
Well, I try, and then, you know, sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't, depending on the time of the month mostly.
Okay.
You know, I wouldn't for a moment suggest that I've it all figured out. I'm learning as I go.
I mean, you're still, like, it's hard to believe in some ways, you're still really quite early in your grief. It's been about 18 months?
Yeah, I mean, it's crazy. Well, yeah, Simon died on October 26th in 2017.
So not even.
So, which is crazy. I don't know if your sense of time as well, when you're living when you're living with illness and in the scenario we did, or maybe it's just having loads of kids as well. My sense of the years is just strange, you know. I can't kind of reconcile myself. I can't even believe that a year has passed. In some ways it seems like it has been way shorter, and then in some ways it feels like it's been much longer than that. So I don't know, it doesn't make any sense.
It's only like 14 or 15 months at this stage, not even. Yeah. Which we'd consider still very much the epicenter of bereavement.
Yeah, well, as I say, I'm still discovering things, you know. Like I was saying, there's still parts of our house that we're clearing out and changing, and the wardrobe in the boys' room, which was Simon's wardrobe, I only just cleared out the other day. And you know, when I say clear out, I just mean, you know, sorting through and making room for their stuff. And I found all these boxes that I had put there, and when I had cleared the nurse's study, and I put away some precious things of Simon's that I thought, well, I'm not ready to throw those out or move them on. I'll put them here for now. And so these are boxes that I put together, you know, and I came across them and opened them up and just got slammed with all these memories, and it's amazing to me how objects, after just over time, their meaning can change. You know, the meaning of what how you felt when you put them away and how you feel a year later when you open up the box again. It's kind of a revelation or a surprise. You don't really know how you're going to feel about it.
Like you were hijacked by your grief.
Yeah. Finding old things of his that, you know, over time just brought back different feelings and different memories, and I think it'll always be like that. You don't, it's very hard to make sense of a person being here and then not being here. I mean, this is the mystery of life, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's just, do we ever make sense of it? I don't know. We just cope and we continue,
and the permanence of it as well. You know, that it's forever. It's not just something you went through last year.
And particularly when they're so young, you know, losing somebody so young, or when someone's life is so short. I mean, like, God knows, Simon packed a lot in there. He did a lot of stuff. He certainly led a full life, despite all of the challenges. But at the same time, he was so young. If you know, I know we swim with these two lovely ladies in their 70s, and they've gotten to the stage where a lot of their friends are are dying, and so they'll turn up and kind of say, oh, we're off to a funeral today, it seems like every other day, and they go, no, it's a good funeral, it's a good funeral this time though, and what they mean by that is that it's somebody who lived a long life, and not everybody gets that, and as I say, it comes back to that kind of wake up thing, isn't it, that we all, I think that, like, in our civilized sense, we think that if we follow certain rules that we're entitled to certain things, not realizing that, like, by following those rules is no guarantee that you're going to be given those things. There are no guarantees, and control is an illusion.
Yeah.
So in a way, again, going through these things, or in that space we talked about that sense of awakening from the fog, it reminds you of that, which is a good reminder that yes, obviously there are some societal rules that are good to follow, but they're not everything. And thinking outside the box, and really thinking about what is meaningful to you and what is meaningful to your children as they grow, and what do you want to teach them. These are all things that grow from that, which is a good thing, I think.
Do you find that you relate differently to people with that knowledge or that wisdom?
Well, I would never call myself wise, but as I say again, I think it's just you recognize it in other people, I think, is the thing. It's just a look or a feeling or a level of conversation that you fall into very swiftly when you meet somebody. It's a connection that you have with other people that is very meaningful and intense and wonderful, and certainly in terms of connecting with other humans, it only adds to it. So yeah.
And do you have a hunger for those types of connections?
Yeah, they seem to just kind of come my way.
Lucky you.
Well,
nice.
I mean, it's that thing of all that hippie stuff about what you put out there, you get back. I say that in the best possible way. It is very true, but there is that thing that if you put out a memoir, where you write all your innermost thoughts, you tend to get people project that back to you, and they tell you theirs.
They meet you at that level.
They meet you at that level, for sure, and it's intense and wonderful and sometimes overwhelming, but it's never boring.
And how is that for you? We're here in Greystones, it's a small little village.
Yeah.
I assume lots of people know you at this stage. How is it for you walking around, getting your coffee, knowing that people know these intimate details about you?
Well, I wouldn't want to think about that too much. I don't. I luckily I'm a bit of a daydreamer, so I tend to not really. I kind of walk around in my own daydream, really, which is different from the fog, or maybe it's the same thing. But my head's always miles away anyway. So people are really nice to me. It's okay, but they're probably thinking. They don't tend to, on a chatty level, unless it's somebody who's been through something or has had some kind of pain in their life. Most people wouldn't connect on that level. They wouldn't kind of go, oh, you're the lady who wrote the book and you said this. They tend to kind of avoid all of the intense things that I've said in my book, which is grand. But I get regulated by my own kids as well. Like I have a get naked sign in my kitchen, and my son sort of saying, he's having a friend over, and he's kind of saying, look, it's okay, Mom, I told him that our house is really messy and that you've got to get naked sign on the wall. I'd rather that you took it down, but I have warned them. So I get scolded by him all the time.
And I think, just back to the memoir as well, Ruth, when you share at that level with people, it's such a gift, because it enables people, it gives them permission to do the same, to acknowledge their own hurts or their own growing or their own inner world that actually a lot of people do keep hidden. And I know as a bereavement therapist, I see a lot of these people who life has split them open all of a sudden, and they don't know this new world at all. So for you to use your creativity to show this is the potential landscape inside all of us.
I would hope that, and it's massively fulfilling to write something from from the darkest corners of your soul, and then for people to relate to it in any way, obviously, and for it not to have been done. I mean, like I can genuinely stand over it and say, there are so many things in this modern world that seem to be done from like a place of ego, and the kind of the selfie sense of how do I make a success of this, or how do I, I'm having a life moment, how can I maximize this, and that kind of thing. And I would like to, art and writing and those sort of things should be separate from that, and I love the idea of, if somebody's having a hard time, go read a poem, or go and have a walk and look at the sea, or read a passage from a book that helps, and it could be abstract, but they're the ways to feed your soul, I think, anyway. So it was done from that place, and hopefully it connects to people at that level,
It's like what you said earlier, it's just a knowing. When you look at someone, it's a knowing, and I think when we read a poem, it's a knowing with the poet who's written it.
Yeah.
There's a resonance there. So what now?
What now?
What's going on in your life now?
Yeah, and my well, I'm busy with the 5 little grieving ones, who are coping a lot better these days, it has to be said. Some days good, some days bad. That keeps me busy, and I'm trying to. I was working on the script for the book, got optioned by Element Pictures, and so that I've been working with them to write a script for a screenplay for a film of the book, which has been really, as I say, what was described earlier, what it's been like. It's a very different form of writing as well, and I've kind of missed the freedom of prose, or it's just a different way of writing, and so I'm kind of formulating. I'm doing a lot of reading at the moment, and I'm putting together a few new chapters for a new book, which will be fiction based, but fiction-y, I should say.
Is it ever fiction?
Is it ever fiction? That's what I mean.
Yeah.
Fiction as in, yeah. But there's so much room in that. It's just a wider scope to explore things a bit more, I think. And my kids are older now too, and getting to the teenage embarrassed stage if they don't want to be written about, and I have to respect that. So fictionalizing things just gives me more scope to and you can kind of blend people together then, like in a mixer, and just and blend thoughts and memories together, and it's a lovely space. So it'll be more of that, more of the same kind of narrative voice, but just written in a more in not as a direct personal voice, if that makes sense.
Where do you find your joy these days?
Well, there's plenty of joy to be had. Yeah, in my work, in my kids, in my friends. There's we were laughing the other day about the grey skies and stuff, and I was arguing that it's no coincidence that all the writers and and stuff come from Ireland, where we have grey skies. Too much sunshine and empty-headedness is not good for the creative spirit. A little bit is good, but I could quite happily go back to living an empty-headed, happy life, but I kind of feel like I've found this thing, this writing voice, and I like, in order to channel it, I need to keep my edges a bit sharp, if that makes sense. So
your edges a bit sharp. What do you mean by that? The clouds need to stay another few months.
A little bit cloudy, but just not getting too complacent. And knowing and keeping a sense of my own independence as well, and it never bothered me, that sense of being a widow. I grew up with very strong women who raise kids on their own. I don't feel like I'm alone, but I mean, in terms of the day and its challenges, I don't really divide it into joy and moments of joy. Like, even in the depths of stuff with Simon, there was plenty of joy to be had in the kids and all of that. So yeah, I'm more into the tapestry. Yeah.
It's all woven in there in the fabric of your day.
Yeah.
Well, Ruth, I wish you so much success with your new book, your screenplay, and your current book, which was published 18 months ago now. I Found My Tribe.
strangely, which I only realised the other day, the book was published in 2017 and Simon died at the end of that year, which is very strange that they both happened in the same year.
Yeah.
Yeah, 2017.
Yeah. So I found my tribe in all good bookstores and online. Thank you so much, Ruth. You're such a gorgeous person, and it was such a pleasure having you here.
I don't want to go. It's really comfy on your couch.
Well, let's have a cup of tea. We'll switch this off. And yeah, thank you so much. And I hope that someone listening today has found inspiration somewhere in there. I've no doubt they have.
Well, from my rambling nonsense, if you can find anything worth thinking, then I am truly grateful.
Thank you, Ruth. Thank you so much for listening to this episode of Shapes of Grief. This podcast is not a substitute for professional medical or psychological advice. If your grief is making you unwell, please do go to your healthcare provider. Grief is a normal part of being human. You are not alone. Join the Shapes of Grief community in our private Facebook group and find more support and useful links on shapesofgrief.com. Until the next time, from me, Liz Gleeson, stay well.